Hello, friends, and welcome to the November 1st edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director. Today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And y'all, it seems like this is the first episode in a really long time that we haven't had the Texas legislature to talk about, either in terms of the regular session or the multiple special sessions. But we do have some important content for you today. As leaders from across the globe begin to gather for the United Nations 26th Annual Conference of the Parties in Glasgow to discuss the climate crisis, we're excited to bring you this Climate-palooza episode of Weekly Witness, where we will help you understand, first of all, what COP26 is, what faith leaders are doing there, what you should know, and what you can do. And here with us for this important conversation are Texas Impact's Executive Director, Bee Moorhead. Hey, Bee. Susannah Tuttle with the North Carolina Council of Churches and North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. Hey, Susannah. And they're all muted, but I promise you they're there. And finally, Reverend Michael Malcom with Reverend Michael Malcom with Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the People's Justice Council. Pastor, thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with Bee, first of all, because, she signs my paychecks, but also because she has been several times to the COP in person and is here with us today on Zoom. So Bee, you have been in these rooms. Can you start out today by giving us a little more detail about what will be happening at the COP and what the faith community is doing to engage in the process?
Sure. So, and I want to say I'm excited that Susannah and Michael Malcom, or as we affectionately refer to him, Rev, are with me. As you know, Texas Impact is the home of Texas Interfaith Power and Light. And Interfaith Power and Light is a national network. Susannah and Rev are the leaders of their respective state Interfaith Power and Light organizations. And one thing that's really exciting and new at COP26 is that Interfaith Power and Light has its biggest presence at the COP ever. And I think Susannah and I will both talk about that a little bit more as we go. Well, what's going on for the next 2 weeks is that negotiators from 185 countries around the world are coming together to move forward on a negotiation framework that started in 1992 with then President George Bush, who was part of the Rio Earth Summit that set in motion this global climate collaboration known as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And since that time, all of these countries have been working together, sometimes in good spirits and collaboratively, other times with a little bit more tension, to try to figure out ways that each country individually and its subnational units like cities and towns and states, and sometimes multi-country collaboratives together, and sometimes the whole world, can work to reduce carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions to keep the world from heating so much that we risk jeopardizing systems that make it possible for human beings and other creatures to live on planet Earth. So for the next 2 weeks, they're going to be negotiating and talking. And while it can seem very theoretical and abstract, one of the Maori, I think, or other people from the Global South today was speaking. She said that even stones eventually decay, but words last forever. And the words that countries use to communicate with each other and the words that they come up with to describe what they're going to do are going to seal the fate sooner or later of human life on Earth.
So I know a lot of the headlines coming out of this will be, about, and we'll talk later about President Biden spoke this morning. Other world leaders will have some things to say. But what role specifically does the faith community have in what's happening there, and why is that important?
I would love to pitch that question to Rev. He has been to the COP as well, and I think has some unique insights.
I appreciate that, Bee. Immediately what came to mind was that the faith community needs to continue to add pressure for a moral call for us to be involved and to pay our fair shares, to relieve the burdens of communities that are suffering. It is as faith communities, our moral call to lift up those who are most vulnerable, to look out for the least and the left out, if you will. And a way of doing this is bringing to bear the stories and the imagery, the various circumstances that our people are in. And by our people, I mean all those who suffer. And we need to claim it that way as our people, to take possession of those who suffer and take care of their burden and ensure that they aren't burdened. And so a way of doing that is by advocating at home to ensure that it's not just talk that's coming from our leaders, but there's action that's being done and investments that are being made to ensure that the burdens for those who suffer the most are eased and shared equally amongst us. Thank you.
And so we're definitely going to get into what those calls to member of Congress and that advocacy should look like later in the program. But one more question just about kind of nuts and bolts of what's happening there. So when faith leaders are at the COP, are there opportunities to be a part of that dialogue, or what does that look like during the course of the conference?
There's sort of an kind of circles of influence kind of thing that goes on at the COP. And, so the faith community is part of what we call civil society. So it is there's this batch of people who are there representing the parties to this ongoing United Nations framework, the treaty or the set of agreements or whatever. The people who are in the room representing the nations are called parties. The people who are not representing nations in that official way, the observers, are civil society, and they are faith communities. They include labor and academia and local government, and all of those actors together have a really important role, because the people in many ways, it's not any different from how you would think of a state legislature. When we say Texas Impact or North Carolina or Alabama, same deal. When we say we got legislation passed that increased children's access to healthcare, or we stopped a bad bill, we don't really mean we, like the faith leaders did that, right? Because we're not in a position to vote. But we know that the people who are in a position to vote on legislation or on global negotiations depend on the voices of people outside the process for moral clarity, as Rev says. Also, and Susannah is going to talk about this more in a minute, for policy, practical policy knowledge that will help them make good decisions. So it really is important for all of us to be there, kind of like, and Scott knows that I love a football metaphor more than anything in the whole world, because
she's a pro.
I don't know anything about football, but I think this is right. only one person gets to be the quarterback, but it takes the whole team to help them make a touchdown.
Sure. Yeah, that works. That works.
How about that? All right.
That works. Also, and Sid and Josh will affirm this statement after this last weekend. We're not talking about football anymore. It's
right.
It was a rough weekend. So Michael's from Alabama, so maybe he can keep talking.
If you notice, I've got my red and black on. Go Dogs.
All right. Well, you can definitely talk football.
I live in Alabama, but I'm a Georgia boy, blue and blue. Yes,
right.
sir.
We're definitely not talking about that then. We'll go ahead and bring Susannah into the conversation. Definitely get off this football talk. So we can talk Astros baseball for at least a minute. But
I was gonna say I'm actually a very proud Green Bay Packer owner, as one of the only publicly owned team in the country. I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm very, very proud. So huge Green Bay fan.
So watch for a new Texas Impact podcast coming soon. Policy Wonks talk football, and
yes,
definitely I'm going. So Susannah, thanks for being here. I want to get you into the conversation, especially because one of the big issues that the faith community is going to be paying attention to in these conversations is how the U.S. and other countries is working to meet their fair share emission goals. And I know the United States Climate Action Network, USCAN, that Bee's already mentioned, has made proposals for emission reductions. But help us understand what fair share is and what they'll be discussing at the COP in relation.
Yes, Scott. Well, thank you so much to Texas Impact for hosting this weekly witness. And we're making sure that folks in North Carolina and across the country are also following along. So we're grateful for you providing this incredibly critical resource as we try to navigate this whole international, scope of how we need to come together in international solidarity, and why we at home here in the United States really need to take the accountability and responsibility for learning and then acting on that knowledge. So a couple of years ago at the U.S. Climate Action Network annual convening, I first started learning. I've been involved in this work for a long time, 10 years as the director of NCIPL. But I had not really given a lot of thought to what would be considered to be equitable global climate finance. That seems way out of my scope as somebody who went to seminary to study ecological ethics, and just, because I care. And I often call the work that we do the What I Love campaign. And so when it all of a sudden hit me like a ton of bricks, that so much of this really is about who's going to pay for it. That this, when we heard it's the economy stupid kind of mentality of language that we're familiar with, I think it really was a great awakening for me as a person of faith and as a faith leader to really sit with this very, very hard discussion about fair shares. And which is ironic, right? Because as people of faith, you would think we would be like the champions of fair share. It really is the moral platform from which, we aim to serve. And so putting the global climate emergency into the context of fair shares, just it opened my heart that reinvigorated me to want to do more, even when I felt like I was at the brim of what I could actually engage with. And so, real briefly, there are a lot of really, really, really smart people that have been working on fair share methodology for all of the COPs, decades and decades of analysis. And the executive director, Kea Chatterjee of U.S. Climate Action Network, really came to push those folks that were thinking in terms of fair share to collectively organize the 195 plus member organizations that make up the U.S. Climate Action Network. And for those of you that might be new to USCAN, that's the acronym. This is the United States convening of those working on climate action domestically in relationship to CAN International, to Climate Action Network International. And so CAN International, countries in the global south, countries that are directly experiencing climate impacts today at a level that you in Texas understand, you in Alabama understand, us in North Carolina understand that this is already happening. And so they were pushing us in the United States to say, you need to figure out what the US fair share is, and you need to commit to it. And then you need to hold your elected officials, members of civil society, and the private sector accountable to that. So I'll stop after saying what our US fair share is. And before I get to that, I just want to say there's 3 pillars to the US fair share. One is it's our overall historic responsibility. We've released more global warming pollution than any other country, and we remain the world's 2nd highest emitter. We always hear about China, right? But they have 4 times the population that we do in the United States. So we have a huge fair share responsibility. We have the financial capacity. We are the world's wealthiest country, with much of that wealth concentrated in a small elite. And then finally, it's the right thing to do. We have the moral and legal obligation to protect human rights, which are threatened by the climate emergency. And so, drum roll, please. What is our fair share? It is 195% carbon emission reductions at 2005 levels. So whatever we were emitting on the planet in 2005, we have to reduce that to the degree of 195%. And that's our responsibility. So there's more on that. That's very complicated. How can something be more than 100%? This is where climate finance comes in. This is where the issue of loss and damage comes in. And this is where ambition comes in. And those are the 3 top priorities for us as people of faith at this COP. So I'll throw it back to you, Scott. I know that was a lot.
Yeah, that was helpful. And we'll maybe at the end talk about what we can do to help reach those goals. But you did mention loss and damage. And so I want to bring Michael into the conversation. And we've already established Rev is from Alabama and, has a heart for Georgia and Georgia football as well.
But I'm from Georgia. I live in Alabama.
I got you.
But I'm from Georgia. Yeah.
So both of those states, like the state of Texas, I think would understand the impact that this climate emergency is having both today and the costs associated, right? I live near Houston. So, it seems like every year we're having a 500-year flood now. So we know how expensive these impacts can be, but there are many parts of the world who just can't sustain those negative impacts. And one of the important items that the COP will be considering is funding for loss and damage, as Susannah said, for impacted, particularly poor and vulnerable communities. So help us understand this loss and damage component and what we should be paying attention to at the COP.
Yeah, so it's really about how we finance loss and damage and how is that calculated. Loss would be, just to paraphrase it, loss would be whatever you cannot retrieve again. And damage would be whatever was destroyed, but can be either replaced or regenerated with the proper investments. I want to pause in saying that. I laid that out, but I want to pause for us as communities of faith to step back and slow down and really think through this. I'm from Georgia. I live in Alabama, but I had to go to Tanzania, Africa, to get a real understanding of loss and damage. It was there that I heard this young lady by the name of Vanessa. You may have seen this sister running around with Greta Thunberg. But during this particular time, she was speaking on this panel and we had conversation, and she was telling us about a young lady, about a family who had to sell their adolescent daughter, into early marriage in order to be able to make up the substance for the crops that they had missed because of drought. As communities of faith, when we talk about loss and damage, let's talk about what real loss and what real damage looks like. That should lend us in our call for that 195%, because there's no way that young lady's life can be retrieved. It's both lost and damaged. Her innocence is lost and her life is damaged.
Right.
That family having to make that hard decision. In order for all of them to survive, one had to be sacrificed. How do we reconcile that? Well, we call for us to do the right thing and to do what's fair and what's equitable and what's just, what's morally right. So not only are we talking about the loss of crops, not only are we talking about the loss of livestock, not only are we talking about the loss of livelihood, but let's also talk about the loss of life. Let's also talk about the loss of family structures. Let's talk about the loss of culture. For those who are experiencing sea level rise, that's a very real thing, because now they have people either moving into their communities or moving out of the communities, and they're losing culture as a result of the gentrification that's taking place. So let's talk about loss and damage, and as communities of faith from that sense. And that's the way that I approach it, and that's how I'm coming at loss and damage. And so I'm hoping at the same time in answering that and sharing that, I'm answering what loss and damage really is. It's a hard thing to really wrap your mind around because it encompasses so much. But at the same time, as you've heard, it's a very serious thing that we must, even though it's a scary thing, it's a hard thing, we must take that on and tackle. And for communities of faith, it's our job to call the attention of those who are wayward and those who are walking outside of what it is to be community. So that's where we need to be, and that's what we need to be doing. I hope I answered your question in that long run on, Scott.
No, I think that's good in helping us understand the impact that this emergency is having on communities and people. I wonder if you or someone else can say a word, like, what does that look like in trying to address that at COP26? Like, the storytelling, I think, is important, but what is there anything in particular that you'll be watching?
Yeah, let me
at the conference.
Yeah, so one of the things that US CAN is doing, as well as CAN International, and something that communities of faith can absolutely do, like I said, I'm really pushing for an at-home push because COP is so limited. And even this morning, I've been on call since 5 o'clock this morning, and they have restricted access even more for civil society. So there's but so much advocacy we can do in real time in the room. And so my push is for us to push here at home, wherever you are, push your legislators so that they can then push our negotiators to really, really get involved with this. And again, giving you the tools and the material in the storytelling. I think that's what really moves the heart. I can come up and I can talk to you about GHG emissions and we need to do this and we need to invest in this particular technology. But honestly, that's not my job. I didn't go to school to be a scientist. And I ain't spent all my whole life in the faith community and in the faith world for me to talk science to faith communities and faith world. No, let me talk your language. This is a moral call. This is a moral crisis and therefore we ought to be front and center in our advocacy for them to do what US CAN and CAN International has asked. Make sure it's permanent on the agenda, each and every COP, and make sure that we stop just talking about it and we actually start looking at investment. How much money are you going to commit to making this happen? How much money are you going to bring to the table to ensure that the burdens of the people are taken care of? I don't want to go on any further. If I miss something, Bee or Susannah, you all, please.
Yes, if I can really quick, because you were talking about making sure that we make that commitment. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about thinking in terms of climate finance, of every dollar on the planet and every form of currency around the globe, is it needs to be directed towards this, addressing this emergency. It's a matter of life or death, literally. And it was interesting because the delegate who spoke this morning from Costa Rica, the storytelling that you're talking about, started by talking about saying goodbye to his 8-year-old son. And his son was asking why he was going to this meeting, why he had to go. And he said, I'm going for you. And he started telling, a story along those lines. And then he was begging the global community to stop investing in military and war, both from a private, perspective and a governmental perspective. What are we fighting these wars for? And there was just all this imagery. So the storytelling, and I will never forget his presentation, because I was so connected to what he was sharing. And, again, what is the faith community's, role there? What I asked the delegates, our president from IPL, Reverend Susan Hendershot, is there. There are many, many other, we have, as Bee said, the largest delegation of faith leaders that I'm aware of from the United States that are attending this COP. And what I really implored upon them as they were going to be having conversations both with the secular society from the United States, but also with other faith leaders and community leaders from around the world, is that the religious community has pledged over $57 trillion in the form of divestment. And we need to be leading the conversation about what that reinvestment is. It's great. We got to continue to talk about divestment, get your universities and your cities and everybody and their, sister to move money out of the fossil fuel investment arena. But we've got to put that money to work today. And so if we're showing up and you're in your local congregation, one of the things that I always ask the communities that I work with in North Carolina is, do you know where your congregation has its bank account? That's a very simple question that we should all be able to answer. And I've got climate activists and climate justice leaders all over this state that can't answer that question. And God bless you. You're not the person that takes the collection plate to the bank and makes a deposit. But those are the kinds of conversations we need to be having at home. Where do you bank? Where do I bank? Move your money out of the institutions that are financing this destruction and get involved in your local cooperative, get involved in your local credit union. All of our churches should have deposits in the places where money is making good in the community and be that example. So thank you for that. Those are the storytellings. Just where do you bank? Ask those questions.
That's exactly right, Susannah. And Scott, I just want to jump in and say that what Susannah's talking about is we see that kind of mirrored in the way that we talk about, thinking globally and acting locally. The reality is we think globally and act locally, and then sometimes we have to think locally and pressure for global action, right? Because your bank can make those, your church can make those decisions about where you bank. But policy is what drives whether everyone will whether the right choice will be the easy choice, whether the right choice will be the straight shot. And what we have today in the United States, we have our president was, in Glasgow this morning talking about everything that the United States is ready to do, wants to do to come, he didn't mention 195%, but we'll get there. But what stands between us and all those actions is Congress and the action that Congress needs to take to pass federal legislation. So one of the things that your congregation can do is talk to your member of Congress about Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill. And those two things together, it is important that they are together. Build Back Better is so important. And it's easy sometimes to let the perfect be in the way of the good. It's going to be easy for people in Glasgow to do that. And it's going to be easy for people in the United States to say, well, one thing or another that I cared about was taken out of Build Back Better, so I'm not as big of a fan of it as I was. I was on a call with loss and damage activists and advocates from around the world a couple of weeks ago, And one of them said, we've been talking about this since 2015 in Paris, and we've been pushing for, the whole pie, and we've gotten nothing. Let's start somewhere. Let's get something. So in the United States, we need to say, it doesn't matter if you're not perfectly happy with everything about Build Back Better. Let's start somewhere and get something, because the opportunities that are in that legislation would be transformative in many ways. One of the ways that they would be transformative is that they would provide new finance for your congregation to make choices about its energy use and its the way that it relates to energy and water and land use. And so I think it was sort of holding those two things in tension, that what makes you be an effective storyteller as a local congregation is if you can tell your member of Congress, we did find out where we bank, and we did switch to a bank that supports the climate policies that we want to see, right? So it's always those two things walking together: what you do individually and what you say in the public square to move policy to help more and more people make the right choice be the easy choice.
So we did have John Johnson from the ELCA a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and he said in his couple decades working on Capitol Hill, Build Back Better was maybe the most important piece of legislation he had a chance to work on. So continues to be so. Go listen to that podcast for more information, but keep calling your member of Congress on that. We did talk before we started recording this morning. So we are recording it during the noon hour on November 1st, Monday, November 1st. And the president did speak this morning, our time. Any other thoughts, reflections on the comments he's made so far?
Oh, gosh. Well, I know that lots of folks have had to travel very, very far distances to get to Glasgow, and our president looked weary, quite tired. I feel as though there's an aspect of it came across as performative. I want to be honest. As I like to say, people of faith speak the truth, and we seek the truth. I think it's going to be very interesting. There's an event this evening that is going to be a direct action event of activists calling out the world leaders that are going to be having a very fancy dinner this evening. Actually, as we speak, they're probably getting over there. And so that's going to be interesting. That's actually going to be on Facebook Live. Our friend Jacob Johns, I think, is going to be airing that. So take a look for that. I hope the president is listening. He got so much pomp and circumstance in relationship to these other countries' leaders, as if we're somehow, if we're more important, then we have to take very, seriously the accountability and responsibility, and that we need to be the leader that we, portend to be. And so, I found the folks in the countries that spoke after the president spoke to be far more compelling, earnest, telling their truth. And so I call upon, Special Envoy Kerry and the president, as they're, being wined and dined across glorious Glasgow, that they are really listening and coming back. And I know that they have a hard job to be over there, to show up in a space where the entire planet is watching what happens in the United States Congress right now. And I call upon all 100 members of Congress to take this very seriously. I think we've allowed the Republican Party to just sort of, take one for the team, and somehow we put all of our attention into two senators, and Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. And in reality, what about all those other 50 Republican senators that need to step up and listen? Open your hearts. You claim and pretend to be people of faith. Listen, learn, do good, be the change that we need to see in the world. And that's how I feel about the president's calling on his Catholic faith and John Kerry's Catholic faith as well, as they represent us in the world stage.
Amen. Amen.
All right.
So, Scott, I wanted to, because Susannah has said a couple of different times, she's talked about specific speakers, and I know that maybe you were about to get to this, but I just want to make sure people know that they can watch this COP online, and they should. If you want to watch the COP online, you go to UNFCCC.int. That's United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change .int for international. And when you go to that website, that is the United Nations Framework's homepage, you go to the main conference page, you'll be able to see everything that you could see if you were in Glasgow, and in some cases more, because Rev, as you say, apparently access is quite limited this year, and that's not good. It's not good for the future of democracy worldwide for that to be a trend. But you can watch the speakers. You can also see events that kind of like a webinar, that you might watch on any topic here at home. And you'll be able to see press conferences that will lift up some of the things like Susannah's talking about, the direct actions that people are taking. And I would wonder if Rev and Susannah, if there are particular other links or websites or places that you would want people to go to be getting additional information so you can kind of play along from home.
Yeah, this today what I was watching, so those of you that are taking notes, was on UNFCCC-COP26.streamworld.de and /live. And then that took me to where I needed to be. And I hope Rev will probably have some other resources. I didn't mention the US Fair Share website, but this one's an easy one to remember because it is usfairshare.org. And you can read all about the Fair Share there. I know we're trying to put out, I'm actually compiling because I didn't get to it yesterday, and the time difference, there is a little bit of a delay. And so I'm learning about all these different, I have like a calculator as to what Glasgow time is. But there are events that are going to be coming up in the future, and we're going to try to get those on your radar by sending out an IPL daily, which I hope to get out this afternoon. So Bee can make sure that all of her listeners, Scott, and your listeners on Weekly Witness can sort of get ahead of the schedule. But yeah, I've already been really profoundly influenced by many of the speakers. One in particular, Nizreem Elsiam, I think is the way you pronounce her name, from Sudan. She's the chair of the Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change and chair of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And I'm now following her on Twitter. And I mean, this is just such an amazing experience to get to interact and learn. You might have met her in the past, Rev, but she seeing these youth speak, I think, is the highlight for me.
So we've teased it a couple times during the course of this conversation, and I know Rev talked about it. We need people making telephone calls now. This isn't just a bunch of folks over across the ocean having conversations. We need people in the United States and Texas, since we've got a Texas focus, talking to their elected representatives. Rev, we'll start with you and then open it up. What's your message to them if we're making telephone calls today?
I would say that my message would be, let us not be hypocritical. Let us not speak of relief and speak of healing but then be purveyors of the opposite. Let us move to invest in caring for people and planet versus trying to make a profit. That would be my message. We have a moral obligation to meet the needs of our people and to protect those who are unprotected. We have historically failed in meeting this obligation. We've recognized that in that the Biden administration has clearly said that they recognize this historical harm. Let us not be hypocritical and shorten the people on the investment and shorten the planet on the investment. Let us meet this crisis with the fervor that we acknowledged it with, not just to get elected, but to really, really make a difference.
All right, Bee, Susannah, anything to add? What would your ask be if we're making telephone calls this week?
The same. I mean, just to really, for folks, I think what we do best as leaders that are honest, as I said, speak the truth, seek the truth, to really, really remind people that hold places of power that if you do not take action at this moment in time, you are lying to yourself and you're lying to the world. And we are witnessing your leadership or lack thereof, and you will be held accountable. And if not in this life, then in every single form that you even, pretend to believe in. Go into your depths of your heart and lead with love. That's what we're going to be judging at this point. Every single vote that is taken right now will either be from a place of love or a place of greed. And we're going to check those boxes and understand what you're saying to the world and to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors. We're not kidding around. This is the real deal. So lead with love.
And the last thing I would add to that, I would say amen and amen. And the last thing you want to say to an elected official, the first thing you want to say to an elected official is, and you can count on me. You can count on me. I have your back. I know this is hard. We are a team. We are a team together. Our country is a team together, our community, our district. And we are putting our money where our mouths are, in my church, in my neighborhood, at my house. And I want to help you do that for us, for the country. Let me know how I can help you, because saying no, saying I can't do it isn't going to work for me. So you just let me know what I need to do to help you get there. Because it's not an option to say no.
We definitely have some work to do. And I really appreciate the work that the three of you are doing each and every day. I do want to give you a chance before we close out today to leave us with some shameless plugs. So anything you want to leave us with today before we close out? Susannah, I'll start with you.
I just can't encourage folks enough to learn about what the U.S. fair share is. I know I threw out that huge number of 195%. Breaking that down real quickly, that's a 70% carbon reduction domestically, at the source. I want to be clear. What is very dangerous right now is the language of net zero. That's a whole nother podcast. Net zero is fake zero. They're calling this the net zero COP. It's distracting. It is disturbing. It's dangerous. So learn about what net zero is and learn about fair shares. Go to usfairshare.org and then call upon me. I am giving presentations all over the country right now, specifically for faith communities, to really be able to sit with the foundational values of, again, historic responsibility, financial capacity, and the right thing to do. Let's be the leaders of this ministry and this mission to save the planet and all that is good on it, and to care, to lead with love. So usfairshare.org. Ask me for a presentation. I'd love to give it to you. And yeah, just keep learning, keep asking questions, and then keep saying yes. Because yeah, we are a team. I love that. We are all together in this, and yeah, that's it.
And listeners can find you at the US Fair Share website, or where can we find you?
You can, and also my email is Susannah, SUSANNAH, old school style, at ncipl.org.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Michael Malcom, anything to leave with us today? Shameless plugs.
Yeah, you can always reach out to us via our social media, either Alabama Interfaith Power and Light or the People's Justice Council, either one of those. You can also reach us on our websites as well. For this COP, I will be doing broadcasts pretty much daily, giving debriefs on what's going on, as well as what's happening with the loss and damage, because that's where we're particularly focused at. And raising up community issues. You can find us on our YouTube channel, the People's Justice Council. And lastly, we will be having on the 9th, I believe it is, our Creation Justice webinar, where we will have people that are actually at the COP that'll be coming in and speak with us. Kelly Stone, Miss Ruth Ivory Moore, and Chloe Noel will be speaking with us for our Creation Justice webinar, where we'll be talking about our international responsibilities. Again, communities of faith. There was a time when we were the Mecca for society, and when we spoke, everybody shook. We've got to get back to that place. And until we speak up for society at large, for the care and concern of the planet and the people, we won't get to that place. But in order to really proclaim or reclaim our prophetic voice, we've got to get back to what really matters, and that's our protections for those who are least and left out. Thank you.
Thank you, Rev. And Bee, anything to leave us with?
Yeah, I will just say, again, all three of us are the respective state representatives of Interfaith Power and Light. Interfaith Power and Light has resources for the COP. We're doing all the three of us, since we're not in Glasgow, are all helping to make sure that we've got blog posts and videos and prayers going up daily from American faith communities there. And you can find all that stuff at www.interfaithpower-light.org/COP26-resources. It's a tricky URL. I guess I'd say we'll be promoting them on social media a lot. I'll say the URL one more time: interfaithpower-and-light.org/COP-26-resources, and look for all three of us and all of our colleagues on all kinds of social media for the next 2 weeks as we try to help people in the American faith community step up and speak out and help our country do the right thing.
Well, friends, this has been an incredible conversation. Bee, Michael, Susannah, thank you so much for your time today, but more, thank you for the incredible work and ministry you're doing every day to create a better and more sustainable world for all of us and for future generations. So thank you for your work, and we'll look forward to following up with you in the weeks and months to come. And friends, thank you for tuning in today. What an incredible what an incredible conversation. I hope that you'll be sharing this content with your friends, with your congregation, so they can be up to speed. I hope you'll do the work over the course of the next few weeks to make sure that you know what's going on and know how you can influence elected representatives and your networks back home. And if you've stayed with us this long, please make sure that you leave a rating or review so even more friends can see this content. Make sure that you're leaving us the highest rating. Leave a comment. From time to time, we'll read some of those on air. We love great reviews, and they help your friends find the program. Also, remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact social media for upcoming announcements, and feel free to email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, make sure that you and your friends are members by going to texasimpact.org/friends. These are unprecedented times, and the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. Let's get to it.